Couple finds 50 bobcat kittens in backyard, but the real shock came days later. It wasn't normal. Not for a bobcat, and definitely not for this place. The kittens were everywhere. Under the faded wooden bench, atop the rusted wheelbarrow, dangling playfully from the edge of a torn patio cushion. Some wrestled in the dirt. Others blinked wide-eyed from behind flower pots or poked their heads out from beneath the porch steps. They weren't just hiding. They had made themselves at home. And yet, not a single sound came from the forest beyond the fence. No mother's warning call. No rustling of leaves. Just a soft summer wind and 50 pairs of tiny, golden eyes watching a man and woman stand frozen in disbelief. Elaine's hands clutched the edge of the sliding glass door. Tom didn't speak. He just opened the screen gently, barefoot on the cracked concrete, moving like he might wake someone. That's when one of the kittens approached. It was no bigger than a shoe, its spotted coat matted in patches of dried mud, its tail twitching like it didn't quite trust itself. It didn't hiss. It didn't run. It simply sat down, tilted its tiny head, and blinked up at Tom as if it had been expecting him. Elaine stepped out behind him. Her breath caught. She was counting them. 5 near the hammock, 8 under the garden table. A few, maybe 6, peeking from a tipped-over crate where they'd made a nest out of shed leaves and torn burlap. They weren't just visiting. They were living here. No traps, no claw marks, no scent of blood, just silence. Like the world had paused to let something impossible happen. Bobcats didn't do this. She knew that much. She'd grown up on this land. Her father used to warn her about mountain lions in the canyon or the odd fox slinking into the chicken coop. But bobcats? They were ghost animals, seen only by game cameras or spotted once in a blue moon slinking across the road at dusk. Never like this. Never in groups. Never friendly. Tom crouched. One kitten pawed gently at his shoelace. Another climbed the leg of the faded lawn chair beside him. None of them ran. None of them flinched. Elaine stepped off the patio and felt her foot sink slightly into the earth. The soil had been freshly turned, a wide patch near the rose bushes, messy like something had been digging or nesting. She looked back toward the tree line. Still nothing. No movement. It had rained the night before, a soft, soaking drizzle that made the ground spongy. But that didn't explain the faint scratch lines on the fence gate, or the tufts of adult fur snagged on the lowest wire. Something had passed through, something large, and then vanished. One of the kittens let out a high, breathy squeak. It wasn't a meow. It sounded more like a whisper than a cry. Weak, tired, like it had been waiting too long for something that hadn't come. Elaine bent down slowly and held out her hand. The kitten backed up at first, but then inched forward, pressing its nose into her fingers before collapsing in a tiny heap beside her foot. She could feel it trembling through the ground. Tom finally spoke. His voice was low, like he didn't want to interrupt whatever this was. "Where's the mother?" Elaine didn't answer, because in that moment, a much heavier silence crept in, one that didn't belong to the forest or the kittens or the evening wind. It was the kind of silence that came after something, after an ending, the kind that left behind only pieces. The kittens weren't here because they were lost. They were here because something else was, watching, waiting, or gone. And as Elaine turned to look back toward the trees once more, she didn't notice the smallest of the kittens limp quietly across the patio, dragging something torn and cloth-like in its mouth. A shred of denim, faded, worn, too small to be from an adult, too familiar to ignore. Elaine didn't move right away. Her eyes locked onto the scrap of denim the kitten had dropped at the edge of the patio. Frayed and damp, it lay limp in the dirt like something gently placed, not dragged or discarded. Tom followed her gaze, then crouched again, brushing his fingers over the fabric. It was soft, old, and unmistakably part of a child's pant leg. They hadn't had children on the property in years. No neighbors with toddlers. No local families camping nearby. The nearest town was 30 miles out, and even then, most of the area was empty ranch land or fenced wilderness. This place, their home, had always been silent, untouched, tucked deep enough in the woods to feel forgotten. But that denim meant something had passed through, something young. Tom stood slowly. He scanned the horizon again, trees fading into mist birds absent from the canopy. It was quiet in the way that meant more than calm. Quiet in the way the earth holds its breath when it knows a story has been interrupted. Elaine stepped off the stone path, moving around the kittens as if she didn't want to disturb a single one. They watched her go. No fear, just wide, waiting eyes, like they'd chosen her. The backyard sloped into a patch of uneven soil shaded by two leaning pines. The ground there was softer, rich, dark, and as her boots pressed into it, she saw them, small depressions. Not paw prints, not quite human, but something in between. Toes splayed, uneven weight, as if something had walked half upright, half crawling, dragging a hind leg. She followed the trail. Not far, just to the edge where the forest thickened again, where the light barely touched the underbrush. There, tangled in a patch of ferns, was a shallow bowl made from moss and old towels. Human towels. One pink, one blue. Worn, tattered. The kind you'd find in a motel or a cheap roadside inn. And in the center, a small toy, a plastic dinosaur, dulled by weather and shoe marks. Elaine knelt down, brushing her fingers across the surface. The moss was still warm, but there were no signs of a human child. No footprints deeper than a toddler's might make. No diapers. No food. Just that denim, those towels, and 50 bobcat kittens now living in a backyard like it was the only safe place they knew. She didn't speak as she returned. Tom was on the porch, 3 kittens now curled asleep in the crook of his arm. One of them stirred and sneezed, a dry, crackling sound that didn't belong in a healthy animal. Elaine felt it then, like a thread pulling her chest. This wasn't a miracle. It was a warning. Something had brought these kittens here. Not 1 or 2, not a small litter, but dozens. Weak, thin, most with dried eyes or dull fur. Some limping, some too still. A few already fading in corners of the yard where they tried to hide from light. And the mother? Still gone. Elaine looked toward the forest once more, this time slower. Not searching, listening. Then she saw it. Not a shape, not movement, but a pattern. A path in the dry grass, leading from the far edge of the fence, winding behind the shed, around the tool pile, and then back toward the patio, like a route someone or something had taken over and over again. Not frantic, not random. A circle, a routine, a habit. That's when the first shadow moved. It came from the fence, barely taller than a cat, gray-brown fur, barely visible between slats of peeling wood. A figure paused, then darted out of sight as soon as Elaine turned fully toward it. Not a predator, not fast, almost hesitant. She didn't chase it. Instead, she walked to the edge of the path. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the figure returned, just a little closer this time. Thin, hunched. A bobcat, yes, but wrong somehow. The legs too short. One side dragging. A scar across its muzzle. And most striking of all, its eyes. Blind. Completely clouded. White-gray orbs staring in her direction, blinking against the sun. It didn't run. It didn't threaten. It simply sat and waited back. Behind her, a few kittens squeaked softly. The blind bobcat twitched one ear toward them, but never moved forward. Elaine stepped back. She gave space. She let the silence stretch. The bobcat stood, sniffed the air, and slowly turned, limping back into the shadows, disappearing behind the trees once again. And Elaine understood then. This wasn't its home. It was just the one delivering them. The caretaker. The messenger. Not the mother. Not anymore. The days passed without a single sound from the woods. And yet the kittens stayed. They nested deeper into the folds of Elaine's life. Beneath chairs. Inside boots. In baskets she once used for herbs. Their tiny bodies seemed drawn to corners that held human warmth. The windowsills, the laundry bin, the blanket left carelessly on the back porch. They didn't destroy. They simply occupied, as if the house had always been meant for them. Tom cleared out a section of the old tool shed, lining it with hay, thick towels, and an old mattress topper. It wasn't planned. He just started dragging things out of storage, one item at a time, saying nothing. Elaine didn't question him. They both knew something unspoken had moved in with those kittens, and it wasn't just the sound of soft paws. There was a rhythm now. Morning meant refilling shallow dishes with water and softened food. Noon meant brushing dirt out of corners, lifting sleepy bodies off windowsills to wipe them down. By evening, the two of them sat side by side on the porch steps, surrounded by the living. Sometimes a kitten would climb into Elaine's lap and fall asleep so completely, so trustingly, that she found herself holding her breath, afraid even her heartbeat might wake it. She never expected to feel it again. That softness, that silent presence, the thing that had been gone for so long it had no name anymore. Once, in her early 30s, she lost a child before she ever saw its face. The world moved on quickly. People called it early, as if that made it easier. They said nature knew what it was doing, that maybe it wasn't meant to be. But the truth? It had never left her. Not really. That's why the denim shook her more than Tom could have known. That was why the smallest kitten, the one with the torn ear and the crooked tail, stayed closer to her than the others. Always watching her, always trailing a step behind, no matter where she went. It didn't want to be held. It just wanted to be near. She called it nothing, gave it no name. But in the quiet of the night, when it climbed beside her chair and tucked its nose beneath her palm, she whispered, "You can stay." Not loud, not for anyone else, just enough for the kitten to feel it. Tom never said much about it either, but Elaine noticed a shift. The way he cleared leaves from the yard more carefully now, watching where he stepped. How he moved furniture slower, never dragging it. How he left the sliding door cracked open each evening, just in case something needed to come or go. They both knew what they were doing. They were waiting, not out of fear, out of respect, because the mystery hadn't lifted, not fully. The blind bobcat hadn't returned, but new signs appeared in the morning. Small things. A pine cone moved. A blanket tugged slightly from a shed. A kitten left sleeping in one place and found curled up in another. Elaine set up a single wildlife camera, not to spy, but to understand. She placed it low, near the rose bush where the earth had first seemed disturbed. A quiet, respectful eye. When she reviewed the footage the next day, her breath caught. The screen showed nothing at first, just the porch at night, dim moonlight filtering through the trees. Then, at 3:42 a.m., a blur. Low to the ground. Slow. Struggling. The same bobcat. But it wasn't alone. Something else trailed behind it. Not another bobcat. Not an animal. A child. Crawling. Barefoot. Thin arms dragging across the dirt. Elaine paused the footage. She leaned in. The shape was so small, almost impossible to make out clearly. No shirt. A tangle of long hair falling forward. No face shown. Just motion. Just shadow. But unmistakably human. She called Tom. They sat together, watching the grainy clip again and again. Neither spoke, because that's when the pieces rearranged. The denim. The moss nest with the towels. The dinosaur. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a delivery. And someone out there, someone impossibly small, had followed the bobcat, or had been guided, or carried, or both. And they weren't gone. Not yet. Elaine didn't sleep that night. The kittens were restless too, pacing the windowsills, turning in circles, mewing in short, confused bursts like they were missing a sound only they could hear. At dawn, the smallest one pawed at the front door. Not to go out, but to wait. Elaine sat beside it, and for the first time in years, she hoped for a sound that scared her, footsteps from the forest. Something breaking the silence. Something more than the ache of not knowing. The forest didn't speak that day. No movement. No shadows. No sound. Elaine checked the camera again the next morning, but nothing new appeared. Just whined through branches. Kittens stretching in the porch light. Empty stillness where mystery had lived the night before. But something had changed inside her. She no longer thought of this as a coincidence or an accident. This wasn't a case of orphaned wildlife wandering onto their land. It was a pattern, deliberate, almost sacred. Someone or something had chosen this place. And now that same force was pausing, holding its breath, waiting, perhaps, for the humans to decide what they would do with the truth placed gently at their feet. That morning, Elaine did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She opened the attic. The steps creaked like bones remembering movement. Dust hung in slow, weightless clouds. In the far corner, beneath a faded sheet, she found it, a wooden cradle. Her father had made it by hand, carving the name they never used into the frame. She didn't uncover it fully. She just placed her hand on the side for a moment, then turned and went back downstairs. Outside, Tom was carrying bowls of water to the edge of the woods. Not near the fence. Not obvious. Just barely within the shadows where grass stopped growing and pine needles covered the earth. He didn't speak either. They had passed the point of needing to. They were making space. That night, the kittens didn't sleep indoors. Not all of them. Elaine had moved several soft crates and old towels into the shed, leaving the porch lights off. Something about light felt wrong now, like it would break the spell or scare away the truth. The moon rose in a silver hush. Wind moved only once, around midnight, brushing the tips of the ferns beside the back fence. Then, silence again, until the smallest kitten, the one with the torn ear, let out a short, breathless chirp. Elaine sat up. She hadn't been asleep. Not fully. Just listening with her eyes closed, as she had every night since the first appearance. She stepped outside barefoot. The air was thick. Not hot. Just full like it was holding weight. And at the edge of the shed, near the path behind the rose bush, something moved. Not fast. Not bold. Just soft. She stopped walking. Let her eyes adjust. Let the darkness decide what it wanted to show. And there it was. A child. So small. So thin. Knees dirty. Hair wild and tangled. Shirtless. Silent. Holding something clutched to the chest. A bundle of leaves and sticks. No, not sticks, bones. Tiny ones. Arranged like a nest or a shrine. Elaine didn't speak. Didn't move. The child looked at her. Eyes wide. Hollow. But not scared. Just tired. Then the blind bobcat stepped into the clearing. Not beside the child, behind. A silent sentinel. Scarred. Still. And though it could not see, its body moved like it already knew the path. Like it had walked this route more times than anyone could count. Elaine dropped slowly to her knees. She didn't reach out. She just stayed there, level with the ground, letting the earth speak louder than any words. The child blinked, looked at the kittens. Then, in a motion so slow it felt rehearsed by years of instinct, stepped forward and placed a bundle on the ground. Then turned and ran, not into the forest, into the shed, without hesitation. Elaine didn't follow. She watched as the bobcat turned once toward her, blind eyes catching the moonlight, then slowly limped away, vanishing into the trees like smoke. In the morning, Tom found her sitting beside the open door to the shed. She hadn't slept, but she wasn't tired. Inside, the child was curled up in the far corner, wrapped in the folds of an old moving blanket, one kitten tucked into the space beneath their arm, another sleeping on their chest. The rest curled along the edges of the wall, like sentries keeping watch. There were no words, no questions. Elaine just placed a small folded towel beside the child and walked away. Because some truths don't need language. Some answers arrive quietly, like breath, like fur, like 50 kittens scattered across a forgotten backyard, waiting for someone to notice that miracles don't always look like light. Sometimes they crawl out of forests, thin, broken, but not lost. Not yet. The days that followed moved like a dream caught in slow motion. The child didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't smile, but they stayed. And the kittens stayed too, calmer now, less scattered, as if their job was done. They no longer clawed at doors or scratched at walls. Instead, they slept and watched, always watching the child, as if protecting something fragile that the forest itself had once wrapped in shadows. Elaine moved quietly through each day, placing food gently on the wooden crate just outside the shed. She never crossed the threshold. That space belonged to something older than comfort, something sacred. The child would emerge only after she had stepped away, only when the porch door clicked shut behind her. Tom had stopped asking if they should call someone. There was no one to call, no one who could explain what this was. And then one morning, Elaine found something left on the crate instead of taken. A single white feather, curled at the tip, perfectly clean, resting in the center of the empty food bowl. She didn't touch it. She just stared, because they didn't have birds like that here. Not white, not full-bodied like that. It was too large to be from a pigeon, too delicate to be from a hawk. And it wasn't just a gift. It was a sign. That same afternoon, a man arrived. He didn't wear a badge, didn't knock. He just stood by the tree line in silence, watching the house. Elaine saw him from the kitchen window and stepped out, heart slow, hand steady. He didn't approach, didn't explain. He only asked, "You've seen the cats?" Elaine nodded. He didn't blink. "They come when something breaks," he said softly. "When something needs to be put back together." Then he turned and walked away, vanishing down the road like he hadn't really been there at all. That night, the camera picked up something new. A second figure. Not the child, not the bobcat, but another adult, thin, gaunt, standing in the background of a single frame. Watching, not moving, hair hanging over their eyes, face unreadable. Elaine paused the footage. The figure wasn't close. It wasn't threatening, but something about the posture, the stillness suggested something else. Recognition, like they knew what the kittens meant, like they had seen them before, somewhere else, in another forest, another time. Maybe they had followed the trail. Maybe they were part of what was broken, or maybe they were the reason this had happened at all. But they never returned. The child stayed. One morning, just before the frost came, the child left the shed door open for the first time. Inside, Elaine found not just the child and the kittens, but drawings. Dozens of them, scratched into the dust with a dull rock. Circles, trees, one shape over and over again, a bobcat with wings. She wiped her eyes before Tom could see. There were no words for this kind of story. Only images, only breathing, only the way the child reached up. Not to speak, not to touch, but to place a small stone in Elaine's hand before curling back into the shadows, their trust as clear as a sunrise. And then, that evening, the smallest kitten vanished. No blood, no sound, no trail, just gone. Elaine searched the yard 3 times. Tom combed the edge of the forest. But they both knew something had come again. Not to take, but to guide. The child didn't cry. They simply sat at the edge of the porch, legs crossed, palms open, watching the horizon like someone waiting for the sky to return something precious. And that's when the blind bobcat came back. Not limping, not alone. It carried nothing in its mouth, but its body was different, stronger, wider. It moved as though it had carried the weight of many miles and returned lighter. Elaine stepped onto the porch. The child stood beside her, and they both watched as the bobcat, without a sound, turned toward the trees. And the rest of the kittens followed. Not all, just enough. Some stayed, some left, some paused for one last look. The smallest never returned. But in that moment, Elaine understood something so old it didn't need words. They weren't meant to stay. They were never hers to keep. They were just passing through. Messengers, mirrors, pieces of something that had once been lost, now gently put back in place. Not explained, not solved, just witnessed. Winter came quietly, not with storms, not with warnings, just a soft shift in the wind, the kind that turns leaves brittle and pushes animals deeper into silence. The kind that doesn't knock, only settles. By then, the child had moved into the main house. They never asked, and Elaine never needed them to. One morning, she found them curled on the couch, the crooked-tailed kitten pressed against their ribs, both asleep under the quilt her mother had stitched decades ago. A fire smoldered low in the stove. The house smelled of cedar and dust. Tom brought in tea without speaking. Nothing needed saying anymore. There were still kittens around. Not as many. Some had drifted deeper into the trees. Others stayed near the shed. But the weight of it had changed. The urgency was gone. What remained was gentler now, like a hush after a long, aching song. The camera was no longer needed. Elaine packed it away. The child began drawing on the windows with their fingers, shapes that only made sense when the fog rolled in and softened the light. Circles, spirals, stick figures with tails. One morning, she saw a perfect outline of a human hand with tiny paw prints drawn inside each finger. She didn't wipe it away. And then, one afternoon, without ceremony, the child walked out into the trees. No bag, no shoes, no signal. Elaine saw them from the kitchen window, moving slowly through the dry brush, the crooked-tailed kitten close behind, stepping in sync, like shadows pressed against the same wind. She didn't run after them. Didn't call out. She just watched and waited. And when they didn't return by nightfall, she left the porch light off, left the back door slightly open, placed a feather, the one left weeks before, on the kitchen table beside a bowl of warm milk. Nothing stirred. The next morning, a new silence had taken hold. Not emptiness, not absence, just a stillness that felt complete. Tom found her by the rose bush, standing in the morning mist. Not crying, just breathing. At her feet, arranged in a perfect circle, were 5 white feathers. Each one different, each one pristine. No footprints, no drag marks, just that, a message made of air. And in the center, the smallest denim scrap, folded, pressed flat against the soil. Elaine bent down slowly and picked it up. She held it in her hands for a long time, not because she needed answers, but because she finally understood that some stories don't end. They return, in fur, in silence, in small hands pressing into cold glass. She turned toward the forest one last time. The trees stood still. No movement, no eyes watching, but somehow everything felt seen. She stepped back into the house and closed the door gently behind her. The camera never turned back on. The porch light stayed off, but in the shed on the inside wall, drawn in soft charcoal smudges, was one final image. A child, a bobcat, and behind them, a trail of tiny paw prints fading into mist. No names, no goodbye, just a final moment left behind like a whispered promise. That healing had happened here, and it had been enough.